We start most of our Matthew Discipleship conferences with some sort of a intro to discipleship or discipleship 101 class. And so I know for some of you, you've heard a talk like this before. And part of my goal is not necessarily to surprise you with anything new. I will, because I can't help myself, share a little bit of some of the things I've been looking at and thinking at lately as I continue to dwell on it. But my experience has been every time I sit and I get to hear another person do the Discipleship 101, I come away encouraged because I'm sitting there going, yeah, this is what we're about. This is what I want to be doing with my time. And this is, why I care about the opportunities I get. So my hope is there's a lot of familiar ground here. And I hope it's familiar ground that's encouraging for you. So we're going to jump in. And you do, if you grab one of the pouches inside your notebook, there is one of these handouts. Scriptures that are being referenced are on the back. The 12 observations are in here. That's probably a key one because I'm going to reference them a lot and in kind of passing ways. And the same shapes that you have on here will be showing up on there. And my goal there was, I know you won't be able to read all the text on the screen because they're tiny enough on here. But I was like, well, you'll recognize the shape and you'll know, oh, that's the one about confrontation. That's the one. And so we're kind of going, I got young kids, so matching shapes is season of life I'm in. But all right, so discipleship is a big deal in the Bible. Why are we big on discipleship? Because we're big on the Bible. We came into Scripture, wanting Scripture to shape our ministry, and that led us to being really focused on discipleship. So you're not surprised to hear me say that. You showed up at a conference called the Matthew Discipleship Conference. You knew that we were going to have Bibles involved, and you probably were not going, oh, I wonder if we'll look at the Gospel of Matthew and talk about discipleship. Spoiler alert, this is just the start. You're going to get a lot. But the question that has been underneath this conference from the beginning is still worth asking, which is just what is discipleship and how are disciples made? And you hear that, you might say, well, that sounds like a simple answer, because there's lots of ways people talk about discipleship, and I've heard lots of folks who like to use real simple answers. A disciple is a learner, and that's true. Sometimes they'll say a disciple is a follower. That's also true. We can say a disciple is someone who lives under the discipline of Jesus. Depending what you mean by that, that can be true too. In the sense that there's some truth to those answers. They catch a part of it. But each of those answers only gives us a piece of the picture. None of them paint the whole picture of discipleship as Scripture gives it to us. So last year, Samuel gave the Discipleship 101 talk, and it was the quest for a definition, right? And so he gave us this definition, recognizing that problem, saying, well, we need to lock in a definition. Here's what he gave us. I think he said we were sipping out of a fire hose, and we looked at a lot of passages. So by contrast, I'll try to look at slightly less. So here's the definition he gave us. Discipleship is the life-on-life process by which a person may mature into the image of Christ. That's your first sentence and main idea. And then to get a little more specific, we say this process includes calling, committed following, hands-on training, testing, and commissioning unto Christ-like replication. It took 2 sentences to try and hold enough together that we weren't going to say, there's something missing that messes up. You've missed that, you messed the whole thing up or something. So it's a good definition. This is, I think, the one worth kind of getting your head wrapped around. I'd encourage you, something maybe worth memorizing, because it gives both the destination, right, unto Christ-likeness, and it also gives the journey. Discipleship's not just check a box and get somewhere, but there's a process, and we've used that word process twice in here to really stress discipleship is this journey that includes all these things and is shooting towards this destination. The goal is maturity into the image of Christ, and the process involves calling and committed following through training, testing, towards commissioning and reproduction. So Sam gave us words for the breadth of discipleship. This year, what I want to try is take those words and give you a map to walk out the process and the journey side. That's why your handout's folded up like a little map, because I'm artsy that way. So at least I'm going to try to do that and make it somewhat clear. So in the Gospels, Jesus has disciples. More importantly for us, Jesus tells those disciples to go and make disciples. That's part of why we make Matthew a centerpiece. I think you should look at all the Gospels. But Matthew's the Gospel where he says, go make disciples. So if you're going to say discipleship, he kind of raised his hand and said, over here. So, and it's not just that Matthew mentions it frequently. In fact, you could argue John uses the word, I think, more times than Matthew does. He just uses it differently. Matthew makes disciple making the end of his story. His book wraps up when they're commissioned. Jesus doesn't ascend. We would just leave Jesus chilling on earth as disciples. And for Matthew, once the disciples have become Christ-like enough that they can now reproduce and make more disciples, Matthew says, my story's done. Go read the other Gospels if you want to hear the rest of the Jesus story. This was the Jesus discipleship story. And so that's where Matthew becomes central. It's Matthew's ending. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe everything I have commanded you. And behold, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. That's Matthew's closing. So Matthew, that's why we've made it the Matthew Discipleship Conference. That's why we've said it. And right there in that wrap-up verse, you have much of Sam's definition, right? Right there, it's Jesus doesn't just say teaching everybody to get some data, teach them the sermons I preach to you. He says, teach them to observe. Discipleship is not just make sure everybody heard it. He's talking about a kind of teaching that becomes a life. People learn to trust him, to obey him, to live under his kingdom, and increasingly to reflect his character, so they observe what he has taught you, and that you are making disciples who are catching what you caught, being baptized into the very name of the one God, right? That's taking on his identity. So our goal is to walk alongside Jesus in Matthew and to just soak up as much of him as possible. And if you want to take the different observations we make and make it simple, it's just us watching Jesus, and when he does something interesting, we write it down. And if he does it more than once, we circle it and say, keep that one. We probably saw something. And so we've got all these different observations. They're on the back, and you're not supposed to be super legible here. The point is, I don't want you to be infatuated with a list of 12 or 14 or whichever version of the list you use. These are all just looking at Jesus. The goal is you see Jesus, and this is a sketch of him. And one is a sketch from the left side and the right side, and because we saw him doing this and we saw him doing this. We want to see Jesus and to learn how to observe, to practice what Jesus does. And if you did that, then yeah, these are the sort of things you probably would start doing. And we have grouped them into this list of 12 different areas, and try and even make that a little easier to hang on to in your head. I've put the 12 into 4 different headings. Casting a discipleship vision. There's ways that Jesus shows and calls people into what he's doing. Creating a discipleship culture. It's very intentionally the kind of people, and he even commands them on what kind of people we're supposed to be together, who his followers should be known by. Cultivating a disciple's character. It's not just a performance and an activity, but there's a lot of places where Christ dives into the kind of character and the way he shapes character in the disciples. And then comparing to a discipleship standard. Equally important, what you measure ends up being what people pursue and chase after. It sets the goals. So you might have had some good principles, but if you make what we always measure and what we always critique and we always talk about the wrong thing, you will still make that other thing the center of the ministry and the center of your discipleship. So we've got to make sure that our standards match Jesus' standards, that we critique what he would critique, and we praise what he would praise. So we're calling people to what he would call them to. So that's the 12 kind of how they fit in the big picture, why we use them. When we talk about the Matthew model of discipleship, we're not saying Matthew is the only biblical book that teaches discipleship. Sam did a good job of showing us that you can see this stuff happening all across the Bible. We're saying that this is one faithful way to understand Jesus' commands, to walk alongside Jesus through Matthew's gospel, is going to hold you close to him. So it's one faithful way to do it. And then if you do that, it should be very practical and give you tangible things that you take, you walk away, and you observe. So what did Jesus call them toward? What does he ask them to leave? What does he demonstrate? When does he involve them? What does he explain privately? How does he respond when they misunderstand, when they fail, when they compete, when they fear, when they doubt? These are the kind of questions I wanted to teach you just to read Matthew with all the questions sitting before you saying, I'm here, especially when I'm going through Matthew, to figure out how to do what he's doing with the 12, to have it done to me and to do it with others. When does he give them responsibility? How does he remain with them even after he releases them? Because these are all going to be the questions I face if I'm going to walk this road. If we walk along Jesus, what you find is all those kind of questions come up and are answered. You're not left holding them. You're going to have a lot of scripture on your hands that gives you the models. In walking alongside Jesus in Matthew's gospel, we find a robust process. Jesus is forming more than just behavior. He's forming thinking, values, motives, relationships, habits. He's forming their faith and their faithfulness. He's making a people. And so that's what we're looking at, is to see a people formed through our time in the gospel. All right. Over the years, we have tried to find different ways to describe it. I've done different conferences. I've helped different churches and retreats. Currently, the list you have in front of you is me trying to trim it down. It's the most simplified it's been yet, and probably the most simplified it's going to get. Because I've had folks going, you got to get this smaller. We're trying to do a one-day retreat. We're trying to do a one-off gathering. Can you come and give us the Matthew model in a half hour? And I'm always like, Jesus took a whole gospel. I am way worse. How do you do that? And part of the struggle is we've got them grouped into 12 observations in 4 categories, trying to make it something you can hold on to and remember. But all of this stuff matters. And the struggle we have in trying to reduce it further is a part of something is less than the whole. I know that's like a real easy math problem. 1 + 1 is 2. 1 is not 2. It's part. And so if you take one true part and you treat it as if it is the whole thing, you actually make the part get weird. Like now the part doesn't mean what it was supposed to mean. So even though it was truly part of it, when you do that with it, you're still wrong. Right? It's not just an incomplete model. Now the model's broken. So we can sometimes confuse parts of discipleship. People say, I'm big on discipleship, and they'll say something that is truly part of discipleship, but that's all they're doing. And depending on what part you pick, you get greater or lesser degrees of functionality out of that. So my illustration I like to use is a muffler is part of a car. If you say that's part of a car, you are correct. It is part of a car. And in Pennsylvania, my car will not be allowed to be inspected if it doesn't have one of these. So it is truly a part. But if you think a muffler is the whole car, you're going to look funny on the highway. You're going to be a traffic hazard, and then you're going to be a pancake. It's just what was true. It's part of a car. When you become all muffler happy, now you're out there in weird land, and it's dysfunctional. That's what we're grappling with when we talk about discipleship, and we're trying to say, well, how do we get it? How do you get it under the less than 12? Give me just one quick sentence, or it's why Sam struggled even saying, I'm going to give you a definition, and then he gave you a paragraph in 2 sentences. Because he's going, man, if I take another piece out, at some point it gets lopsided and it doesn't look like Jesus anymore. And I'm trying to still keep the shape of my master in our definitions and our process. And so that's been what's driving us to say, just read the whole gospel. make your own observations and see if they fit under the same headings I've got. And if they don't, then by all means, add another column or another bullet point. Because what we've seen is, I'll illustrate this rather than with mufflers, with the observations themselves, right? If we care about thinking and values, which is part of our discipleship, but we take away the sacrificial commitment, which is one of the repeated themes in Jesus' ministry, then discipleship stops being discipleship and ends up just being a free class. No commitment. Show up if you want to. Don't if you don't want to. And there's a lot of Christian ministry we do that way, where the content is good and biblical and true, but it's not discipleship. People are there in and out. They miss stuff, and there's no life-on-life connection to see if it's actually being done anything with. So people can learn interesting things without actually following Jesus. We see this in our churches. This is that superficial cultural Christianity where everybody just, treats it as a smorgasbord and they take the parts they like. And it's okay because we just put it all out for free. Come if you want. Take what you want. You get a superficial veneer, but you don't get disciples. But if we emphasize commitment and outward actions, training people on what to do, but we ignore the heart, we don't get into the thinking and the values, then what you get in the name of discipleship, very commonly, is legalism, right? And you get Pharisaical. We're the disciples. Look at us. Our shirts are tucked in, and look at all you people, right? I live in a county with whole groups dedicated to the rules they keep. And you can feel when you come together and you have you didn't know our version of the rules. We distinguish groups by the lengths of their brims and the darkness of their buggies or their cars. And this takes you into a dangerous place because the emphasis becomes all on the exterior actions. You get Pharisees. People learn how to look committed, but it doesn't guarantee that their loves and their motives and their values have been touched by the discipleship. And don't get me wrong, living here, I know there are some lovely people who love Jesus in all these groups. But this is the danger when you lopside towards just the outside and you don't focus on the heart. That's where so many of our scandals come from. Because you have these groups that look super holy, but if you don't deal with the heart, then there's all this secret sin going on. And it eventually comes out and blows the thing up. And so don't think that's just the obviously legalistic groups. Everybody wrestles with this. If we ask people to become vulnerable, right? We know that we want to have a family-like community. So we ask people to become vulnerable, but we don't make it a safe family that's marked by humility and service. Then we often can create a dangerous environment because we ask people to open their lives up without giving them a healthy place to do it in. I don't know if you've ever been in a setting where you realize that you're in like a full tilt group counseling and none of you are qualified to help with the kind of stuff that's coming out. And you're going, what this person's sharing might be wrecking this person's faith, and I just opened this all up. And we can get people in places where they can get hurt. Countless people have been hurt and walked away from the church because they came looking for a safe place where they could share, and we didn't have a place that could receive them well for that, and they just walked away hurt. I took a chance on the church once. I'm done. So I want vulnerability. You need it. It has to happen inside the whole package. Any one of these things done well without another is a liability, right? If we measure everything by visible results rather than faithfulness, then vulnerability, testing, and accountability can become tools for pressure and manipulation. So you shared, now I got leverage on you. Remember, we finished an accountability meeting once with a group of guys, or a group of girls, and I wasn't in it, but I was told, the one girl said, well, now you all have to be my friends for life because you know too much. They're joking. But there are times when it can feel like if I share in a place where where we measure by all the perfection, well, maybe I can't share, right? Because if I do, it'll be used against me. And so we all learn, because I'm not called to faithfulness and measured by biblical standards. When you have bad standards, we actually get bad behavior to match it. That's where, at its worst, you get into the weird culty territory, where it's high pressure, high manipulation, not discipleship. Each piece needs the others. The Matthew model is not a collection of 12 independent bullet points. Pick the ones you're good at or that you like. Independent techniques. It's one integrated picture of how Jesus forms people. And that's part of why we've been at such great pains to boil it down any lower or any less, to summarize it, process it down. Because if we lose a part, we risk losing little bits of Jesus, and then we risk getting someone or something else instead. So how do we hold this picture, though, in our minds? If this is the goal, we've been trying to find ways to just help you visualize it, help you hold it, help you walk it. So when we're actually walking alongside somebody, what does it look like? One of the analogies, it's been used in other conferences. I know some of you guys use it in your own gatherings. The simple answer is, it looks like Jesus. But some folks have described the way Jesus walks using the square analogy. I think you guys have heard this. It originates with Michael Breen in some of the 3DM materials. And depending which edition of their books you buy, it changes. They've even conceded. We've wrestled with finding the good language. We'll pick a set of terms. And so I'm actually going to say, here's his. I think there's some good to it. And then we're going to go ahead and change his language. So when Breen describes it in 3DM, he says, think of the discipleship journey, it's more thinking of it like the map, as having 4 phases. And at the beginning, you start with, I do and you watch. So the disciples are there and Jesus is doing ministry, which moves to I do and you help. They move into hands-on participation. And you round the corner to you do, I help, right? So he's still there, but the disciples are taking on ministry. And then the final phase is you do and I watch. You step back to the back seat and they're doing it. Breen uses this in a lot of different ways. He's got the same issue I do. Is he'll start simple, and then he just keeps adding stuff on. And I'm not even going to take you through all the charts he has for the square. So he would say, when we think of the square, the advantage of it is in thinking of these stages is you can think of the different postures that the leader and the disciple take. So he'd say at the beginning, when you're at the I do, I watch, the posture of the disciple is unconscious incompetence. They don't know what they don't know. They're bad at stuff, but they think they're pretty good. So they show up with very little experience and a lot of cluelessness, but they're there. And so he says for the leader, their posture at this phase is what he calls directive leadership. We don't consult and discuss. We say, we're going over here, and I'm going to preach this message, and you all can listen. Then he would say, as you round the corner, and he talks about the change from this early one, which they're ignorant, but they're excited. When they move into participating is when they become consciously incompetent. I thought I knew all this stuff, and now that I have to help, what on earth am I doing? And so the usefulness of knowing where you are in the journey is now the leader needs to shift their posture a little bit, because they're going to quit if I leave them in conscious incompetence. And so he says, this is where you move to a visionary coach. The coach is cheering them on. Hey, keep going, fight harder, guys, you got this. And you're casting a vision. It won't be this bad forever. You're going to learn this. You're going to be fishers of men. Come on. And so the posture leans into encouragement and vision casting, recognizing where they are. And then as they move out of that phase, you begin to get conscious competence. Now they think they know stuff, and they actually do. Now the leader can move to more of a pastoral consensus because they actually know some stuff rather than just saying, we're going over here, we're doing this. You can go, what do you think we should do? Why would you do that? Let's all talk together. Okay, let's do that. Because you have some competency and you're now building the confidence up more and more in a collaborative way. And so in Breen's model, you really don't become collaborative till the L3, D3 phase. And when you turn the last corner, he says, now you get to unconscious competence. And you say, well, they were conscious a second ago. What happened? But the idea is they've become a lot more confident. They're ready to actually make disciples, and they usually don't realize they're ready. That they've been long enough that the experience is being settled in, and it's time to call them out and to commission them and say, no, you can do this. It's time for you to do this. And so there does come more of a delegation partnership. The posture of the leader is to say, because they are more competent than they know, I need to be giving them stuff and stepping back. You're not under me as much as you're now becoming my partner. So that's the flow. I think as you're hearing that, hopefully you could visualize bits of Matthew floating around as we did that. I like the general flow of it. If you try to map it over Matthew, though, it gets really messy. Breen's training is more in sociology. He understands people well, and he makes great charts for people, and he explains things to people really well. His exegesis has a really good intentions. So I've wrestled with this. We've used it. I've got it printed in some of my handouts. It's helpful because it reminds us that participation changes over time, that you use the different tools you have. It's the same tools often, but in different ways based on where the person's at in their growth process. And that's where I think thinking of it as this process and this journey is important, because it's not flat. You don't treat a brand new disciple the same way you treat somebody who's been with you for years. You don't, when someone's stepped up and been faithful with some things, you respond to that different than somebody who stepped up and just struggled the whole time. Because our goal is this discipleship process. So I think thinking of it as a journey is helpful. A good leader does not do everything forever, but there are seasons where they do more. A good season also doesn't hand everything off to an inexperienced person and just, wish them luck, sink or swim. That's the classic church way. No, we demonstrate, we involve, we support, and we release. And so Breen talks a lot in the first phase, the L1D1, about invitation and challenge. As the ministry is modeled, he's calling people to come follow, and he's challenging people to lay aside what they have. Jesus invites people into relationship, belonging, access, and shared life. He challenges people towards change, sacrifice, and responsibility. So some people need to hear that come and see phase. Come see what I'm doing. And they're like, that's what we've been praying for. Other people need to hear, sell what you have to the poor and come follow me. And that hits, both of them need to come follow Jesus. And it's speaking to where they are. Often the same person needs both invitation and challenge at different moments. So that's Breen's expanded square where he walks through the different sides. I want to offer an adapted square, which is what you have on the back of your handout, to show if you were kind of holding his square upside along Matthew's gospel in particular, and how you might expand his square to speak to a Matthew context and the Matthew road that we've watched. So if you were looking at the square through the lens of the Matthew's gospel and Jesus-shaped model, there's a first change I'd make is just a real simple one. And you know me, I never make it simpler, I make it wordier. Breen's process does one of the things that I see happen in a lot of discipleship ministries, where it's a very definite start, stop, and then we're done, which is just not how discipleship works. It's not what Jesus did. It was messy. There's lots of laps, and he's still there. And even at the very end, when we get the big release, he didn't say, go make disciples, and then good luck, I'm going home. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end. He's still there. And he's there by the pouring out of the Holy Spirit, which is not passively watching. His role has changed profoundly, but he is still actively engaged. You don't really ever, unless people transition from one discipleship environment to another, but if we're still in the same community, we're going to still have relationships. And there's still going to be interactions. I have youth that I've discipled through drama who are not in drama anymore. They're elders in their churches. They're missionaries. And frequently I get calls, hey, can we meet for coffee? I want to bounce some ideas off you and something. They are released. I don't even go to the same church as them. So what they're going to share with me is not my job. They are someone I've invested in. And I'm still available. We meet, we talk, we pray together. And so I wanted to pull the brakes off the end of this thing and say, there's a real intentional process, and then there's this sort of open-ended thing that happens where at the end you're doing stuff, you're taking ownership of ministry, you are being commissioned and launched, and we do that. And I'm keeping space to remain available as God would lead, and as if they're still nearby, if there's ways to do it. So that would just be the first thing is I think we've oversold what the final release looks like. Jesus doesn't leave his disciples. He sends the Holy Spirit to bring his presence to them. He says, I will not leave you orphan. I will come to you. So if we go through the square and we think of it like a map and sort of expand it along the Matthew lines out in the same fashion as before, I would say you get something more like this. And this is seeing the journey. One is, you've got the dotted line at the end, is our goal for the D4 is that they become an L1. So it's not just 4 stages, get your certificate. This has been my issue with some of the older forms of discipleship models, things that were popular in like maybe purpose-driven church, is you had a baseball diamond, which is just a square turned at 45, right? But the struggle with the baseball diamond analogy is once you ran your loop, you had your home run, and it was kind of like, well, then I'm done. No, now it gets more exciting. Because if you're ready at D4, what we want to ask you is to figure out how to find a D1 and you become an L1, that you step into the leadership posture for someone else who's in a discipleship posture. So just kind of making that explicit. Brain would agree with that. I don't think I'm fighting with the man. So you have all this on the handout in the comfort, but at the beginning, I would call it the enthusiastic beginner. The incompetence piece, I think, gets confusing, and we'll address that in a second. But the main thing is to recognize they're a beginner and they're excited, and know that that's a phase. You cast a vision, you get excited people. They all come in excited, and so that's where you do the high invitation, high challenge. You speak to your excited people and you call them to make that big step. And so I've titled the L1 posture there, come and see. I've tried to give you more just phrases that Christ would say. Come and see. You have high enthusiasm, high confidence, but much of the confidence comes from, actually I have, boom. They have experience. Like Brain's chart would say low experience. My experience is your D1s have experience. They weren't born yesterday, literally, right? They just have mixed experience. They don't have experience with you in this ministry. So part of why they have the, unconscious incompetence, to use his phrase, is because they do actually have real experiences. Like, I've done stuff, I know stuff. They just don't know what that looks like in this context. They don't know how much of that stuff actually measures up. Maybe they think they know some stuff that's actually kind of broken, and they're going to have to lay that down. But maybe some of that stuff can get, was not bad and came from another church where they were invested in faithfully, and they're going to be able to find its home. So it's that right now our unity's low because we've got mixed and unsynced experience. High confidence, high enthusiasm, mixed prior experience. And so the leaders can be high direction, high example. They need to see what we're talking about. Because when I say I'm about discipleship, I'm about evangelism, and they came from another group that was big on evangelism, they're like, amen, I'm with you, brother. And then I get out and start doing it, and they're like, what are you doing? So I need high example. We need to get stuff on the table. Then we move into D2. I've called it the discouraged learner, just to take what Breen wanted us to catch in there and make that explicit. You need to know that as they get their hands on, you're going to have a season where you lean in. So come and help. One of the great ways you can encourage people is that, hey, I'm doing something. Come with me. I'm going to do this. Come do it with me. You're discouraged right now. You need to sit close. And let's work together. Because as we work together, they're like, I can't do that. I didn't know that. And you're like, yeah, it's okay. Like nobody does. It's fine. I'm glad you're seeing it. I'm glad you're hearing it. Let's talk about it. Your proximity is going to have to lean in on this phase. Come and help. Come next to me for the discouraged learners. So they're now getting to low enthusiasm, low confidence, but they are starting to get limited shared experience. That come and help phase is where a beautiful part of the camaraderie grows. Some of the sweetest moments when you think back in your own discipleship journeys have been these moments where you got to work closely alongside somebody who didn't need you. They just let you come. And there was a sweetness in that as you watched them and you picked up stuff. So it can take the discouragement phase and turn it into a very sweet formative phase. High example, high discussion, high accessibility. This will be with the Matthew model. Breen's model can sometimes sound like the access slowly ramps up, but my experience in Matthew is he calls them, and like the next time he preaches, they're like, ooh, question. And he's like, yeah, let's go. And he's just with the disciples doing these. So he opens himself up real fast because he knows we've got to work through all this prior experience to move into shared experience. And so the access part is big here. Then as you round into L3D3, their enthusiasm does begin to increase because they finally know how to do some stuff. I think it increases because it's got intermittent confidence. They nail some things. There's a season in Matthew where they almost seem bipolar because it's like, yay, we did it. Oh no, what's going to happen? Yay, Jesus is great. Oh my word, who is he? And you're like, calm down, guys. But it's this kind of fun phase. They do get it, some. They're still learning some. Intermittent confidence. But there is a growing competence and a growing shared experience. They do begin to catch things. And Jesus will even begin to say, don't you remember when we did this? And we did this? And we did this? Figure it out. You got this, guys. Because they have enough shared experience, we can do that. He doesn't do that earlier because he doesn't presume they have the experience to do that. So let me tell you. So we do start getting guided releases at this point. If you start watching for it in Matthew, the disciples get hands-on fairly early. And there's several places where we find out that they were released because they messed stuff up, which means they were doing it by themselves. So he's nearby to sweep in, to deal with where it gets stuck. Still high discussion and high accessibility. And then D4, the enthusiasm begins to grow and the confidence begins to grow because they're finally able to be passionate about a ministry that they've received and are doing. That's why I said it's deep shared experience. Why do folks I've discipled want to come back and chat with me as they're now in other ministries? It's not like that they think that I am skilled in that other ministry. They know I'm good at the few things I'm good at, right? We have this deep shared experience where when they say, here's what I'm wrestling with, they know I'm going to go, I get your heart. I know why that bothers you. There's times when someone says, well, we're doing this, and I'll go, so are you getting any opportunity to do this? And they're like, no, and that's why I'm frustrated. I was like, yeah, you would be. Because like we get each other. We know what we're passionate about, and I can hear the situation and go, well, you're never going to be okay with that because of this. And they're like, okay, so I'm not crazy? I'm like, well, I get you. That's what the joy of D4 is our shared experience is deepening. And one of the big changes I wanted to make in Breen's model, competence matters. And it's on the chart for 3 of the stages. But we're not just trying to build competent people. We're trying to build faithful people. This side of glory, you're always going to be somewhat incompetent. Because you still have your flesh. And so we're looking for people who we're not going to pretend that you've attained sinless perfection or something. We're calling people who now, when they do fail, they handle it with faithfulness. They repent, they own it, they don't make excuses anymore. That early guy thinks he knows stuff. Every time you're like, that's not how we do it. Like, well, my other guy said, they've got 100 reasons for everything. And you're finding someone who's now had a trained humility, where, even when they struggle, they're going to go get counsel, they're going to get accountability, they're going to name it, they're going to own it. We want to build faithful people because we're more interested in the character. Competence without character is a failed discipleship model. And this is an important critique to make because if you try and find 3DM materials right now, they're all but disappeared. As they tried to decentralize, their ministry fractured. Their founder fell into sin. Breen had to take a season out of ministry and go through a whole reconciliation, restoration process with his wife. There was problems with competence without character. And so when you got a model that makes a lot of sense, but you see a crack, you got to pause and go, maybe we overshot. And I think if you read some of Breen's current writings, he would acknowledge that they were able to have a high-pressure, heavy, aggressive leadership model that was not dealing with his own heart issues. And Breen's own words would say, if you want to make disciples, you need to have a life worth imitating. And he's right. And he didn't. So it's important. Our Matthew models had this all along. Faithfulness is the measure of success. How do you know that a D4 is ready to start taking that dangerous next step to where they reproduce into others? Don't just be like, oh, but they are so smart. They are so talented. Everybody wants to be like them because they're so cool. Great speaker. Faithfulness. We entrust discipleship to faithful people. And so you may get stuck at D3 for a while, even after your talents are shiny, till we get faithfulness. And so, tested faithfulness. Jesus lets them have so much release because he wants to see what's inside and how it comes out. He lets them mess up all kinds of stuff because that's where you see the heart and the faithfulness till we get men that he can release to make disciples. So we need to keep that there. We want to grow in a deep experience as we deeply know each other. That should allow us to discern faithfulness. We commission faithfulness from the D4 into the L1. So, actually, let me go back briefly. Let me make a point quick. I said a moment ago we're trying to figure out ways to make everything simpler and easier to remember. And then I have thrown all manner of charts at you. That handout in the back looks like some sort of, circuitry schematic. We have a joke in drama, and I think MDC's learned this joke, that I have the gift of making simple things complicated. So Breen gave you a nice clean square, and I did me to it. I'm going to try to simplify it back down a little bit and say, this is what we're thinking, but get it down to something that maybe would be more memorable. So rather than do postures and D's and L's and 2 phases for everything, I'm going to go back to the original square, and instead I'm just going to give you 4 movements. I think the simplest way is to go back to the first thought. Let's make this a map, make it a journey. You got 4 movements in discipleship. Everything I said I think is worth, if that clicks with you and you like complexity like I do, keep the funny chart. But I think this one you might be able to memorize. 4 movements, and with those 4 movements, I'm just going to give you 4 questions because I think that maybe is easier to latch onto with your head than bullet points and random words that Tim picked. So, M1, to use the same kind of terminology, movement 1 is the movement to calling and becoming. This is where discipleship starts. And the question, if you're in the M1, whether you are the leader or the disciple, here's the question. What is Jesus calling us to become? So I got a new disciple. We're going to describe it. You've moved into a season of calling and becoming. That's what we want to do. What is Jesus calling us to become? M2, formation through participation. We want to move from the calling into formation through participation. And I thought about even reshaping the square. My goal is that movement 1 is short. I want to get people out of M1 as quick as I can and into participation. So I know Breen says that's the cliff where people freak out. I want to push people over the edge all day. That's my job as a discipler, is to take you into the scary waters. That's what Jesus does. And then stay with you there. Not leave you hanging. Show you that we can come through this and there's hope. But so movement 2, how is Jesus forming us through participation? In that scare, in that getting immersed, I want to get their eyes on Jesus. If they can meet Jesus in the storm, they are good for the rest of the road. How is Jesus forming us through participation? M3, supported growth. As they start finding their sea legs, now we can start building this thing. How do we support growth? Through guided release, feedback, and grace. You get out in that messy plate and you get people moving, you're going to start seeing gifts and talents and callings. And then when you see that, this is why I really believe in having flexible ministries, is you might need to say, well, maybe our ministry needs to have a little more of this aspect because I want to get underneath this gift and support it and get them using it. And so, like the drama team, we've had seasons where we used flags and seasons where we didn't. It's directly correlated to when we had people who were gifted and passionate about flags. If God gives me those people and I want to disciple them, then I guess we're doing more flag songs because I want to support their participation and get alongside that with a lot of guided release. They're brainstorming with me how to add flags into a song we never had flags in before, and we get to talk about the gospel and sharing it and clarity, and that release and that support is going to give me opportunities. Movement 4, faithful release. How do we release people faithfully without abandoning them? As soon as you move into 4, you want to be thinking about how we get this release to happen. It takes a lot of work to get a person ready to move into leading a movement of their own. And so we want to say, what needs to happen for that to get there? And movement 4 is all about that tested faithfulness to be ready for that. And we should have that conversation early. They should know, my plan is to release you. Now, my plan is not to keep you forever. And we're not there yet. So what do we got to do? I don't want them to feel like I suddenly was like, so, it's been great, bye. I want them to know this is what we've always wanted to do, and I also want them to see that even when that was always the plan, I'm still here. I'll still support you. So I think this model gives it's cleaner, it's simpler. Then what I want to do is bring the observations back in and sort of show you this square is not a different model. All of the 12 observations are needed all of the time. But I think as you think of the journey, different ones sort of take front stage at different moments. You need to use certain parts more. The whole square operates inside the whole Matthew model. You're going to need a safe family environment for this kind of a trip if you're going to take these movements. So it's always needed. You always need humility and service to shape the relationships. And while invitation and challenge are obvious at the beginning, they're going to have moments where they really pop out even more. Movement 1 is high invitation and challenge. That doesn't mean I'm not challenging disciples at phase 2, 3, 4. I got guys that we've been through several loops and I'm still challenging them. They're still challenging me. These things continue. Tested demonstration of skills is always going to be needed, but it should never be separated from the grace and the accountability. So it's a relational lens. It's not a rigid timeline or a permanent label. What I struggle with some of the 3DM groups is the L1, D1, L2. Like, I'm a D2 right now, and I'm on an L3 with him and an L2, and it gets almost like too precise and too like that's my identity. While this is a helpful way to think about it, if you've done real world discipleship, it's way messier than any diagram I can draw. And so movements, where are we at in the journey, I think gives us a little more of that squishy room. And then let's think about the different observations, how they come in. So let me walk through a couple passages using the square. Let me see. I think I have one other slide I'm not using. Yeah, more observations come up. I think I sort of alluded to that, so I'm going to keep rolling. So if you want to think of a passage that illustrates the first movement well, you're going to go to the beginning of Matthew's gospel when he calls his first disciples, right? In Matthew 4, Jesus comes to the seaside. He's just begun his ministry. The disciples are in the boats, and he says, "Come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." And that is why I would take "come and see" as the key line for this movement. And I would say you're seeing in that moment the challenge and the invitation. They got to leave their boat, but they're also getting this vision. I'm inviting you to become something you weren't. So when we talk about the Matthew model, M1, maybe some of the stuff that takes front stage is disciples are called to be more than they are now. Come be fishers of men is a heavy M1 phase. Do that the whole time, but you really are going to do that in the first movement. He's already demonstrating, they're seeing his ministry. So the high demonstration. That was supposed to be demonstrated. Oh yeah, delegated skills are demonstrated. Okay, that's right. There is sacrificial commitment and challenge here at the outset, and they're already getting access. They walk off with Jesus. All 12 should be happening, but I want to see in M1, some of these guys sort of pop to the front, and you're going to be kind of living with these guys a little more closely. As you round the corner, you want to think about what would the second movement look like in Matthew's gospel, Matthew's journey with Jesus. The come help, you could think of Matthew 14, which I believe that's the feeding of the 5,000. I didn't write it down. Jesus is preaching. He gets weary. He crosses over to the other side. The people hear where he's going. They run on foot, and somehow they match him and show up when he arrives. So they outran the boat. And so then he takes compassion and preaches all day. And the disciples say, "Lord, it's a desolate place. Send them away so they can get some food." And he goes, "Hey, you feed them." And I love that because Like, he knows what he's going to do, and he knows only he can do it. But this is one of these moments where you see he's like, you feed them. You're going to be a part of this thing I'm doing. The miracle is still a Jesus miracle. He multiplies. But they go, well, be really, like, it would take more money than any of us have to feed this group. All we got is this. He's like, then bring me what you got. And I'm going to use what you have to do my miracle. He did not need what they have to do the miracle. He is deliberately, this is that, come help me. When Lydia helps me sweep the floor, I sweep the floor just fine without her, and I did not need her to sweep. Come help me. And she does some sweeping, and I leave some stuff for her to get with her broom, because her participation is what I'm after. This is a miracle designed for them to participate, and it is very much a daddy with some brand new kids. Come and help. Jesus, I'm behind on my notes. So you get a picture there. What's going on Matthew-wise? We got a number of things going on. I got to get my notes up. There we are. They are beginning to get hands-on. Him asking them the question, you feed them, rather than just say, because he could have just said, I'm going to do it, but I want you to help. But he starts with, you feed them, and he lets them answer. He's getting to hear what's going on inside. He's already concerned with their thinking, their values, what they're afraid of, what they know. Which is not a lot right now, but he's already inviting it out. They're getting tested in decision-making, right? What do you want to do here? We still have things being demonstrated. We still have lots of access, right? The other ones are still here. But in M2, you're going to begin to see the thinking and values bit and the tested and the hands-on start showing up. So then if we want to kind of move forward and keep walking with Matthew through our square, go and try. Matthew 17, I think is where we get, Jesus has been away with a couple of the disciples. The others are apparently doing a ministry of miracles. And when he comes back, a guy brings his son and says, I brought my son to your disciples to cast out the demon, and they couldn't do it. And so Jesus casts out the demon, and the disciples are like, Lord, why couldn't we do that? Now, the fact that they assumed they could do it, the fact that he went to the disciples first gives you a sense of what the ministry looks like at this phase. At this point, Jesus can be doing stuff, and the disciples are out doing a ministry of miracles. We know from earlier that they were commissioned to cast out demons, to heal the sick, to preach the gospel of the kingdom. And they're clearly doing that. There's a degree of release here. So go try. They're also doing it poorly because they couldn't cast the demon out, and they don't even know why they couldn't cast the demon out. And his answer is kind of basic, like, did you pray? I remember one of the first times out evangelizing, and I was struggling, and a guy said he was going to help me, and so we prayed together, and then I went to talk to somebody, and I start walking towards somebody, and he grabs me, he's like, whoa, did you pray for them yet? No. He's like, you pray before you go talk to them. I'm like, oh yeah, pray. It's like, duh. My heart was there, but I was new. Go try. And as you try, we're going to see a whole lot more of what's going on come out, and we're going to get to actually train what you do and how these convictions show up. And so we're seeing a lot more. They're coming in. He's beginning to confront. I mean, his rebuke to them for not being able to cast out the demon is harsh. They should know this by now. You wicked generation. They're still getting tested, but we're now getting released. The access is still high. But even though they screw stuff up, and even they screw stuff up that gets sharp rebukes from Jesus, the fact that they're still walking with him, he still keeps them. This is where you see that the focus on faithfulness is becoming higher than the focus on competency. He's correcting their mistakes, but he's looking for people who will walk with him and hang in here and stay with it as we learn, as we grow. And so we're already starting to pull them into a ministry of faithfulness and a view that faithfulness needs to build. All right. Got to get down to the end of it. We're almost there, I promise. So, yeah, I guess that's what I just said. This really is, as we get into this phase, is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger in Jesus' interactions with the disciples. All right, let's move into M4, which you probably, hopefully knew that was going to be Matthew 28. When is that final phase of faithful release in Matthew's gospel? Matthew 28, where Jesus appears to them and gives them that commission that we read early. Go and make disciples. That's the final phase, and we see all these parts coming together. And what I want you to see is we're still seeing everything we just described here. We did it in square shape, we did it in journey form, but we just said everything Sam said last conference, right? We said it's a life-on-life process. We've hammered that pretty hard. Where a person may mature into the image of Christ, right? The faithful reproduction. Includes calling. We put that up in M1, but said it's happening the whole time. Committed following. You wouldn't get a square if we don't get that. Hands-on training. We said especially as we move into M2, deliberate bringing in of the hands-on. Testing from M2 forward, constant testing. Commissioning, leading heavily into the M4 phase. Now you become Christ. But you could argue all along he's been commissioning them to Christ-likeness. That's been the picture and the image he's called them to. That one's getting louder as we move through. And so I want you to see these are, if you think of it more like you got a toolbox full of gears and you're using all of them, but at different points, certain ones become the right gear for the right spot. It's all of these observations at play all the time, and it's the way that they interact as we go on this journey that different ones come in. Access and release become sort of front seat at the very end here. I'm with you always. But it's the interplay between the different ones that we really begin to see the life of Christ replicated in the disciple. Now, what I want to say is that's a great image, and I made it look like it worked. Because I skipped the passages that didn't fit the flow. So if you want to say release only happened in Matthew 28, then what on earth was happening in Matthew 10 and 11? Because he released them in Matthew 10 and 11. He calls the disciples, he sends them out, and then it says he went and preached in their cities, which I think means not that he followed them, but he preached the cities they're from while they went to the places he sent them. Even if he followed some of them, he sent them all out into different groups. He's not with everybody. We have at the very beginning, so remember our square was like, well, phase 1, you watch, I do, and Jesus is like, phase 1, go. Jesus, the square works a little differently. What I want you to see is it's messier, and what I think maybe is a better way to think of it is you're never just doing one square. This is the problem with oversimplifying is if you make, well, you're a D1 and I'm an L1. Look, I was an L4 in discipleship in the drama ministry. And then I became an associate pastor at a Spanish church in inner city York. And I was a D1 in inner city Spanish ministry, even if I was an L4 in theater ministry discipleship. There were aspects where I'm at different points, and I've got hopefully multiple people discipling me. And so discipleship community, we recognize in our lives we're walking through this journey with different people and we're in different phases. And while it's nice to chart it as a linear progression, we don't always move in a linear direction. Sometimes I receive the challenge and I step into the participation, then I freak out and I pull back. And then you got to work with me and get a new vision so that I'll step back into participation. And second round is different. Maybe I pick things up faster, or maybe you've got more baggage to work through. So ideally, we run a square. Realistically, we run lots of squares. And sometimes our squares look like zigzag lines. So think of these movements more as just knowing, well, where are we and what am I calling us to? If I backed out of the participation, maybe I need more of that vision, more of that call to becoming, to see what God wants me to be in that invitation so that I'll step back into commitment. The movements help you kind of see where the different parts of the Matthew model can come into play. And then ultimately, our goal isn't to check off a square. I think the biggest weakness of a discipleship model is to turn it into a grid or a statistical chart where we just make people into numbers and report them in. What we're doing, the reason we're running our circles and our squares, is we're trying to let all of this come together so that we experience the life of Christ in the way these things integrate. The reason I've used gears is I want you to think that they all fit together. It's as we have commitment and as we have a Christ-like community, as we have a vision that points us to Jesus, alongside standards that actually call us to Christ-like faithfulness, in the context of a culture of discipleship that's family-like. It's those things fitting together that are going to help form a heart that looks like Christ, that makes an environment where all of these things are cooperating for calling people towards Jesus and forming people into the likeness of Jesus. So the gear model is not as a factory and stamp people out. What I want you to see is that this is integrated. And you're going to see your best discipleship as you get a holistic vision of Jesus in the way you're working with each other. And then ultimately our long-term goal is that we take the definition that Sam gave us last year. We start walking around these squares with folks. And in this process, we do lots of squares. And in the different phases, we meet Jesus in deeper and new ways, so that all of the areas that I'm being discipled are coming together into Christ's likeness in me. There we go. I don't want squares. I want a cross. If you're not at the end in each area saying, I've now come into more likeness to Jesus. I've connected with Jesus' heart. We talked about going from our mixed prior experience to deep shared experience. I want deep shared experience with Jesus. So in all these different areas, as I'm moving through these processes, I know his voice. I can hear him. I see stuff and I know what he would care about. That's a faithful disciple who's being formed into the cross. This is what we're going for. We have squares and we have charts and we have gears, but what we want is the cross formed in people. So let me give you a brief break, give you some time to think. You've got some handouts. Hopefully this at least gives you a picture and a map for discipleship.